Not authorized. You need to leave. Now. The words struck the air like a hammer. Loud, sharp, final. The younger guard, his jaw clenched and arm extended, stood in front of the steel security gate with the full posture of command. His polished boots didn't flinch. The name tag on his uniform read Carlson, and the badge on his chest gleamed under the early sun. Behind him, another guard watched in silence, uncertain whether to escalate or step back. Just on the other side of that invisible line stood an old man, jacket zipped halfway, cap low, eyes unreadable beneath its shadow. His fingers, weathered and thin, were still resting gently on the rusted plaque welded to the fence, a bronze nameplate dulled by years of wind and neglect. One name among many, but the one beneath his hand was his. He didn't speak, not at first. He simply looked at the plaque for a breath longer, as though rereading something sacred that had once been his. His cap bore the faded stitch, United States Army Retired. Beneath the brim, his jaw had tightened not in anger, but in something more complicated, the quiet weight of memory returning all at once. Across the lot, just beyond the fence, the base had changed. The field that once held drills and cadence lines was now crowded with stages, tents, polished cars, and folding chairs. A ribbon-cutting ceremony was underway. Dignitaries, media, and men in new uniforms shaking hands beneath the shadow of what used to be a barracks. A brass band had just begun tuning up. Flags on poles were spotless. No one was looking toward the gate, except one man. One man in the crowd had stopped mid-applause. His eyes hadn't left the gate since the old soldier appeared. His hand was frozen near his chest, a commendation folder still tucked beneath his arm. And as the anthem began to play, he stayed still, eyes narrowed. Back at the gate, the old man said nothing. He withdrew his hand from the plaque like a father removing his palm from a child's casket. His left knee trembled faintly as he turned, slowly, and began to step back. One hand moved to his pocket, carefully folding a piece of paper with worn creases. The security guard's eyes flicked to it for only a moment, then away, already signaling for someone on his radio. But before the man could take another step, a hush fell across the far side of the field. Someone had paused at the microphone. The sound of a breeze slipped in where the band had been. Even the flag on the pole stopped flapping, as if holding its breath. The man at the podium wasn't speaking. He was watching. If you believe every veteran deserves respect, please subscribe, because every view helps this message reach those who need it most. The old man's name was Emmett Klein. 83 years of age, though his back still bore the posture of someone trained never to slouch, not even beneath the sun. In his day, men like him weren't expected to cry, to protest, or to explain. They were expected to show up, endure, and return home quiet. Emmett had done all three. He hadn't stepped foot on this base in decades, not since the year the final battalion rolled out, and the gates were sealed with chain and rust. But this morning was different. Something in his bones told him it needed to be. He'd woken before dawn, shaved with steady hands, and pressed his uniform cap one more time, though it hadn't been officially worn in years. Not out of nostalgia, but out of duty. Tucked into his coat pocket was a folded envelope, a printed invitation, or so he had believed. The ink on its lettering had blurred at the corners, watermarked by time, or perhaps a little rain the night it arrived. He'd read it 3 times to be sure. Fort Belden, ribbon ceremony, all service members past and present. Welcome for final honors. Inside his other pocket was something older, a narrow velvet case. The kind issued to men whose deeds had no photographs, just reports, torn journal entries, or the word of brothers in the mud. Inside that case lay 3 medals. 2 belonged to Emmett. 1 belonged to someone else. He carried it not for pride, but because today he had hoped to give it to the family of the soldier it had once belonged to. He stepped slowly back from the gate after the confrontation. He did not bark. He did not demand. He only looked at the space where his name was stamped into bronze, now faded green around the edges. The plaque read, "Honor Roll, First Combat Instructors, 1962-1970, and under it, Sergeant E. Klein. Same man, same soil. But to the new men guarding the gate, just another name without clearance. Emmett turned from the fence and made his way toward the edge of the lot. His boots shuffled slightly in the gravel, the weight of memory heavier than his case. He stopped beneath a bent flagpole near the rear entrance, one they hadn't gotten around to polishing yet. There was no shade, no seat, no welcome. He placed the case gently at his feet. He reached for the flask-shaped thermos inside his coat, unscrewed the cap, and poured himself a small swallow. The coffee was strong, bitter, and hot. He sipped without flinching. That kind of coffee reminded him of bivouac mornings, where water boiled in tin canteens, and steam curled upward into the breath of men who might not return. A staff aide from the inside perimeter turned and glanced toward him. A brief look, then quickly looked back, tapping something on a clipboard. The woman with him didn't look at all. Further down, an intern passed by, not older than 20. He saw Emmett, muttered under his breath, "We already cleared the list. Let him go," and kept walking. Someone near the catering tent snorted. "Who invited the ghost of Fort Belden?" Emmett didn't hear that one. Or if he did, he gave no sign. His cap shaded his eyes, and he folded his coat closed with a slow, careful tug, like covering a wound you no longer expect anyone to dress. He opened the citation envelope, weighing the creased paper with both hands. A breeze rolled across the courtyard, strong enough to lift the page slightly, fluttering one corner like a bird struggling to take off. Emmett reached for a flat stone at the base of the flagpole and pressed it gently over the edge of the paper, pinning it to the earth. For now, that would do. Behind the podium, a woman in a business suit began her remarks over the loudspeaker, her voice amplified across the lot. "Today we celebrate legacy, tradition, and the generations who helped shape this land into what it stands for today." The sound echoed slightly, bouncing against the storage sheds and repainted barracks. But Emmett heard none of it. He was watching, waiting, listening for the one name that might be called, the one family that might appear, the one reason he'd come. He hadn't told anyone he was attending, hadn't RSVP'd, just as he hadn't asked permission to train men on this soil 6 decades ago. He simply showed up, as he had then, as he had now. His eyes scanned the crowd. There were soldiers in dress blues, proud in polish, medals gleaming like fresh coins, contractors in pressed suits, political types with perfect posture. Yet not one of them looked toward the flagpole where he stood. Emmett lowered himself onto a small fold-out stool he'd brought from his truck. His knees cracked quietly, not from age, but from a lifetime of loading gear, carrying wounded and marching through jungle terrain. He sat still, but not defeated. He reached into the velvet case, withdrew one of the medals and began to wipe the dust from its surface with a square of cloth he'd kept since '74, a gift from a medic. The metal glinted softly, not bright, not dull, just real. Behind him, a distant trumpet began to rehearse the first few notes of the national anthem. Still, no one came, but Emmett remained exactly where he had been told not to stand, quiet, watching, waiting. The morning light had shifted by now, no longer a gold glaze across the pavement, but a harsher white that flattened everything it touched. Emmett sat beneath it with his coat collar drawn slightly up, more out of habit than for comfort. The fold-out stool beneath him creaked with the weight of stillness. He hadn't moved much, just sipped from the thermos twice, polished 2 of the medals, and placed them gently back into the velvet case. The third, the one meant for another man's name, still rested on his palm, thumb gently brushing the ribbon as though reading it in braille. He watched as the VIP shuttle arrived on the far end of the tarmac, a polished black van with government plates. Its tires barely made a sound as they slowed to the curb, unloading 3 figures in sharp suits and polished sunglasses. Cameras clicked softly. An assistant adjusted the lapel of one man's blazer, and then gestured toward the podium. None of them looked toward the flagpole, not even once. Behind them, the ceremony continued. A female announcer welcomed attendees to the revitalized future of Fort Belden, now a proud cornerstone of private sector advancement. Words flowed easily from her mouth, but none reached the fence line. The breeze scattered them long before they ever touched the edge where Emmett sat. Another staffer walked briskly by Emmett, eyes focused on her clipboard, pen ticking against it like a metronome. She slowed for half a second, glanced sideways, then kept moving. Her pace never broke. The clipboard was heavier than the man in the jacket beside her. Emmett folded his hands over the case again. The third medal remained in his lap. His eyes scanned the crowd near the podium, searching not for politicians, but for faces. He was looking for a woman, mid-40s, brown hair, with a streak of silver through it. Her father had died beside Emmett in the jungle outside Hugh in 1973. His final words had been a single plea: make sure she knows. And so, for over 50 years, Emmett had waited for a letter, any contact. Then, months ago, a message had come from a veterans outreach coordinator. Her name had been found, and she'd be attending today's ceremony. It was all he needed to hear. A small group of junior officers walked by, laughing about something too distant to make out clearly. One paused, gestured toward Emmett with a sideways thumb, and muttered something low. The others chuckled. Their jackets bore insignia, but their eyes bore nothing at all. Emmett didn't turn his head. Near the press tent, a local journalist lined up her shot. She held her camera steady, adjusted the zoom, then panned left toward the crowd, and right toward Emmett. Her frame caught him fully, seated beneath a bent flagpole, hunched in the brightness, holding something no one else could see clearly. But the moment she snapped the image, she twisted the lens slightly, darkening the exposure. In the final frame, Emmett became a silhouette, just another old shape on the edge of a clean ceremony. The coffee in his thermos had cooled. He didn't drink again. Instead, he uncapped the pen from his front pocket, a black ballpoint scratched and chipped from years of use, and scribbled something onto the folded envelope beside him. Just a note, a name, nothing more. Then he tucked it beneath the flap of the velvet case. The breeze returned, a warm gust that carried the smell of trimmed grass and diesel from a generator behind the tents. It stirred Emmett's cap slightly. He reached up and pressed it down gently, not out of pride, but to hold something steady in a place where everything else moved. From behind the chain-link barrier, two men approached with stern expressions. Security again. Not the same guard from earlier. These two were older. One had the kind of mustache you don't trim, you earn. The other looked to have been military himself once. His posture betrayed it. The man with the mustache stepped forward. "Sir, you've been asked not to linger on site." Emmett looked up slowly, then rose to his feet. Not abruptly, not defiantly, just deliberately. He folded the stool with two practiced motions, clicked the case shut, and lifted it. "I understand," he said simply. "I'm going to have to escort you to the parking lot, sir," the second guard added, a bit more softly. His eyes flicked to the plaque still mounted on the gate nearby. He had read it. You could tell by the pause. Emmett nodded. "I won't cause a scene." They began walking, a slow, quiet movement toward the far end of the property. One of the men offered to carry the case, but Emmett shook his head gently. "Heavier things have been carried by lighter men," he said. They didn't speak again, just escorted him across the gravel path, away from the polished chairs and speeches. His boots scuffed lightly against the dirt, each step the sound of quiet erasure. But even as he walked, Emmett's eyes never left the gathering. He scanned the people, still searching, still hoping. The handoff wasn't for him. It was never about redemption. It was about a promise, and that promise had not yet been fulfilled. From inside the compound, the announcer's voice called out, "Please welcome General Calvin Mendez to the stage." Emmett's pace slowed for a half breath. That name, it meant something. A memory hovered just behind the name. Mud, gunfire, the cry of a boy not yet 20. But then the moment passed. Emmett reached the edge of the lot, stopped beside his truck. He looked once more toward the base where he had spent the best and worst years of his life, where he had trained boys who would become soldiers and buried men who never had the chance. He opened the door, rested the case on the passenger seat, closed it softly, but he did not get in. He waited. The wind shifted again, now with a sharper bite. Not cold exactly, but cutting. The kind of air that made old scars whisper beneath the skin. Emmett remained outside his truck, standing just off the gravel path that circled the main perimeter. The velvet case rested inside on the seat, unopened now. The metal within felt heavier by the minute. He folded his arms loosely across his chest, one hand tucked beneath the opposite elbow, the other resting along his ribs, right where a long-healed fracture once lived. He could still feel it sometimes, that ache, especially on mornings like this. Across the base, the ceremony was in full swell. A banner stretched across the stage now, stark red, white, and blue, with the bold words, "Reclaiming the future, a new era begins at Fort Belden." The irony was not lost on Emmett. To reclaim something, you had to first remember who built it, but names like his had no seat at today's table. He heard footsteps before he saw them, crunching over the gravel with deliberate pace, the sound of polished soles, not boots. 3 men in matching charcoal suits approached from the temporary command tent near the central lawn. One held a tablet, tapping at it briskly with his thumb. Another wore an earpiece, clearly annoyed. The third, taller and broader, led the group with the clipped authority of someone used to hearing yes more than why. They stopped a few feet from Emmett. The one with the tablet spoke first. "Sir, you've already been asked to vacate this sector." "I'm not on your base," Emmett replied quietly, glancing down at his boots planted firmly on the county-maintained access road. "This line's still public land." The third man stepped forward. "This is a federal event under private contract security. We're asking that you relocate entirely off visual perimeter. There are photos being taken. Media present. We need a clear field behind the podium." Emmett's eyes didn't flinch, but his voice did tighten, barely. "I trained soldiers here, 40 years back. Some didn't make it home. One of them had a daughter. She's supposed to be here today. This is the only place I can be where she'll see me." The man with the earpiece chuckled under his breath, a thin, dismissive sound that vanished quickly when Emmett turned to look directly at him. "I'm not here for your ceremony," Emmett continued. "I just need 5 minutes, one face, that's all." But the response came swift and sharp. "You're not on the list. That's the end of it." The words hung between them like a stone dropped into still water. No echo, just depth. A shuttle bus turned the corner behind them, engine humming softly as it idled. Its side bore the contractor's logo, sleek and faceless. One of the men gestured toward it. "We'll arrange transport to the far lot. Our staff can direct you to the Veterans Affairs building downtown if you need assistance." "I don't need a building," Emmett said. "I need a person," but they had already turned. He remained still. The gravel beneath him shifted slightly as he shifted his weight. His hand returned to his pocket, where the folded envelope now felt like a stone. From inside the event zone, a speaker launched into another prepared statement. "We honor those who came before us by building for those who come next." Applause followed, polite, rhythmic, utterly detached. Emmett closed his eyes for a moment, not in defeat, in remembrance. He saw the jungle again, nightfall under a green canopy, mud swallowing his boots, the sharp crack of mortar behind a ridge, the weight of a wounded man over his shoulders, breath rattling in his ear. "You'll carry it for me, won't you, Sarge?" the voice had asked, and Emmett had. Carried it all. Back in the present, the staffer from earlier, the one with the clipboard, returned. This time, she brought 2 uniformed officers with her. Not military, private security. Their badges bore no flag, just serial numbers. "We need to relocate you now," she said, eyes darting toward a photographer nearby who was already adjusting their lens to keep Emmett out of frame. One officer gently touched Emmett's elbow. "Sir, please." We don't want to escalate this. He looked at the hand, not angrily, just long enough to make the man realize it wasn't necessary. Then Emmett stepped aside. I buried more friends than I have birthdays left, he murmured. I can stand somewhere else. They led him beyond the main fence line, down the slope to a concrete turnaround by the maintenance depot. No seating, no shade, no ceremony. He placed his hand once more on the velvet case, then lowered it slowly to the ground beside him. The sun reached its apex, and Emmett Klein stood alone again, with nothing but shadow at his back and silence before him. The sky had turned a harder blue now, that midday steel where clouds thinned and the heat settled not like fire, but pressure, the kind that pushed down between shoulder blades and behind the knees. Emmett didn't remove his jacket, didn't loosen the collar. He stood beneath it all, framed against a blank concrete wall, and the chain-link gate he once passed through daily without question, a place that knew his boots, if not his name. He had not moved in nearly 20 minutes. His stool remained folded, the velvet case unopened again. Instead, his hands worked at something smaller, a thin chain, its metal dulled by time and salt. A pair of dog tags, worn so smooth that the letters needed light to be read. They hung from his fingers as he cleaned each ridge with the edge of a cotton handkerchief. A ritual, more than a task. The rhythm slow, left, then right, thumb over number, edge over name. The two tags clicked softly in the breeze. One hung slightly lower than the other. That one didn't belong to him. A sound rose from beyond the compound, faint but familiar. A trumpet, warming up somewhere near the main stage, pressing a gentle run of notes from the national anthem. The player hesitated halfway through the phrase, then restarted. Emmett's shoulders tensed, not in pain, but memory. Music had a way of opening doors you'd long closed, especially when it came from behind you. He did not turn toward the sound, did not look back at the people who had asked him to leave. Instead, he pressed the dog tags back into his palm and held them there, quiet, present. A gust rolled across the compound again, lifting dust from the depot lot and sending it in soft spirals around his boots. He stepped slightly to the side, instinctively shielding the velvet case with his body. He bent slowly, a motion that required effort and breath, and placed the case onto his stool, then draped his coat over it, one fold at a time, so no light would strike the metals inside. Not yet. He stood again, back straight, arms behind him, the tags still in hand, their chain threaded around his fingers like rosary. Somewhere nearby, a radio crackled with static, the clipped voice of a site coordinator checking timelines. Speech 3 begins at 1300. We'll need the final escort at 08 past. Emmett heard none of the planning. His mind was elsewhere now. A different day, a different war. A clearing after rainfall, the air thick with iron and silence. He remembered holding the same dog tags then, pressing them into the shirt pocket of a man who wouldn't make the ride back. Keep him close, Sarge, the medic had whispered. He's one of yours. Yes, one of his. Always. The pain in his back sharpened. He shifted his stance again, leaning slightly against the fence post. He allowed himself one breath of relief, then straightened. His discipline was muscle memory. He would not appear weak. From the corner of the compound, a staff member approached cautiously. Young, no rank. A pale blue lanyard around his neck marked him as a civilian volunteer. He held a bottle of water, unopened. His steps were hesitant. "Sir?" he asked gently. "Would you like some water?" Emmett looked at him, not unkindly, just long enough to measure the moment. "No, I've had worse desserts than this." The boy lingered, unsure what to say next. Then, sensing that nothing more was needed, he nodded and stepped back. He left the bottle on the ground near the stool, unopened, untouched. Emmett didn't watch him go. Beyond the barrier, the crowd had thickened. The third speech was beginning. Applause came again, softer now, more out of rhythm. Perhaps the heat, perhaps something else. A hum moved through the people, low and shifting. It didn't reach the podium yet, but it stirred near the back. A few eyes had started turning. Not many, not yet, but one man near the edge of the stage had stopped reading his notes. Emmett remained still. He didn't carry signs. He didn't raise his voice. He simply held his ground. A soldier not protesting, not disrupting, just being, in a place where his presence no longer fit the script. A living reminder of something that had not been rehearsed. The dog tags were warm in his hand now, pressed between two calloused fingers. Behind the ceremony tent, General Calvin Mendez stood at the rear of the assembly, a folder of remarks in hand, a name on his lips, a memory in his chest. He hadn't planned to speak until closing, but his eyes had found a shape at the fence, and his breath had left him. General Calvin Mendez hadn't touched the glass of water set beside his remarks. Condensation traced a ring on the metal podium tray, undisturbed. His posture remained perfect, spine erect, boots at parade rest. But his eyes were no longer on the crowd, not on the state representative speaking into the microphone, nor the pair of ribbon holders standing ready with scissors and tensioned smiles. They were on the edge of the compound, beyond the fence, past the temporary barricades and leased tents, on a man standing still as a statue beneath the shadow of a long-closed barrack wall, a man Mendez had not seen in 50 years, and yet he'd never forgotten him. He folded the speech paper carefully, once, then again, slipping it beneath the notes binder. The sun caught the trim of his epaulets as he stepped off the platform without announcement, his formal hat casting a long shadow across the aisle of folding chairs. A few heads turned. One aide leaned toward another, whispering, "Is he supposed to go now?" But no one stopped him. His gait was measured, not rushed, but precise. Each step fell with the weight of decision, the click of his dress shoes sharp against the tarmac. He passed by the media cameras, their lenses tracking other faces, past the honor guard, still at attention, past the contractor who had shaken a dozen hands that morning but hadn't shaken the one that mattered. Calvin Mendez had always believed in timing, and now, it seemed, the moment had arrived. He exited the ceremonial area through the security cordon, his pass lanyard visible but unread. One of the officers on duty stepped forward, startled. "General, we can escort you." But he raised a hand, subtle but firm. "Not necessary, Sergeant." And then he kept walking. Emmett didn't notice him at first. His eyes had lowered again, resting on the folded paper on his lap. But as the general's shadow crossed over the base of the flagpole, he felt something change. A pressure shift. A stillness in the sound. The two men faced one another across the invisible line between past and present. One stood with stars on his shoulders, the other with memory in his bones. Calvin stopped 2 paces away, removed his cover with slow, deliberate care, tucked it beneath his left arm, and saluted. It was not a rushed gesture, not ceremonial, but deep, exact, reverent. Emmett looked up, his brow furrowed at first, as if struggling to place a face behind the layers of decades. But then his breath caught, not in alarm, but something far quieter. Recognition, the kind that lives in a single shared heartbeat from long ago. Neither man spoke. They didn't have to. A slow hush spread across the compound, beginning at the perimeter and rippling inward. The aide from earlier stopped mid-step, her clipboard dipping. A veteran in the 3rd row rose silently, one hand pressed to his chest. Behind him, a young soldier in dress uniform followed suit, and then others stood. The shift happened without command. No bugle call, no program note. Just the slow realization that something sacred was unfolding outside the planned schedule. Emmett did not rise immediately, but his posture changed. His back straightened, his shoulders squared. The chain of dog tags was slipped carefully into his coat pocket. "I wasn't sure," Emmett finally murmured. His voice cracked not from weakness but from time. "If anyone would remember." "I never forgot," Mendez replied. Behind them, the crowd began to lean, not physically but emotionally, toward the gate. People turned away from the stage, from the refreshments, from the lists, toward the man who had not been on any of them. A military photographer lowered his camera. The ribbon remained uncut. And somewhere behind the silence, a speaker's voice faltered mid-sentence, unsure why no one was listening anymore, because the real ceremony had just begun. The silence that had slowly crept over the courtyard now held its grip like a drawn breath across a battlefield. It was the kind of quiet that didn't ask permission. It simply settled, commanding attention without volume. The last of the ceremonial remarks sputtered to a halt under the shaded tent as more eyes began to shift toward the fence line. Even the small rustle of pamphlets being folded seemed suddenly inappropriate, like paper being crumpled in a sanctuary. General Mendez remained motionless beside Emmett, his salute now lowered but his stance still locked with reverence. There were no cameras on him, not yet, but the weight of his posture alone had begun to tilt the gravity of the event. His presence beside the old sergeant wasn't dramatic, nor was it performative. It was simply right, the kind of right that made everything else feel suddenly wrong. A few feet behind them, the security checkpoint that had denied Emmett entry stood unattended. The guard who had barked the initial command was now off to the side, arms crossed tighter than before, as though shielding himself from something colder than wind. He said nothing. No one needed his voice anymore. The first to follow was a young cadet, maybe 21, face clean-shaven and nervous. He stepped off the concrete path leading back to the tent and walked quietly toward the pair. He didn't say anything. He just stopped a respectful distance away and stood at attention, eyes forward, as if ordered into place by something unseen. Then another, and another. The entire color guard began to move, not in unison, but in response, like iron filings drawn to a magnetic truth. Their boots clicked softly against the pavement as they approached Emmett and the general. They lined up behind them, forming a shape not found in any rehearsal, not outlined in any event planning document. A new formation born of instinct and honor. Back near the stage, the program coordinator was murmuring into a walkie-talkie, his voice tinged with confusion. "They're all leaving the platform. I don't know why." No one gave a signal, but the signal had been given, just not in any language he understood. The sound of chairs scraping echoed softly as more people rose. Veterans in the crowd, some in full dress, others in plain clothes with pins tucked into jacket collars, stood up, slowly, deliberately, not to approach the stage, but to follow where the reverence had gone. A retired Navy chaplain removed his sunglasses and started toward the fence. A woman in civilian clothes with silver hair and a careful gait placed her hand gently on the arm of a man beside her and whispered something. They stood together. The photographer from the local paper, who had earlier snapped a dismissive shot of Emmett through a shaded lens, now lowered his camera. He didn't take another photo. He simply turned it off and removed the strap from his neck, as though understanding that this moment couldn't be captured, only witnessed. Inside the VIP tent, where catered refreshments sat untouched, a congressman glanced around as the crowd thinned. A few of his aides tried to redirect attention, gesturing toward the stage, but it was useless. The gravitational pull had shifted. There was no clapping, no background music, no scripted narration, only footsteps, one after another, moving steadily toward the gate. Emmett finally spoke, his voice low and worn, yet resonant in the space left behind by silence. "I didn't expect company." General Mendez allowed the ghost of a smile. "You've always had it. We're just late." Emmett looked beyond the growing line of figures behind them, uniforms and civilians alike, and for a moment, his eyes misted. Not from emotion alone, but from the sheer disbelief that this many had chosen to leave comfort for respect, that they had chosen to stand behind the man who had not been on the list, but who had clearly never left the field. From somewhere behind, a car door slammed. A television crew arrived, too late to stage the story. They saw no podium to focus on, no official to frame, only a wall of backs and folded hands, eyes turned toward an old man holding a case of medals. No one asked him to explain. The speaker's microphone let out a small static whimper as it was turned off. The ceremony was over. But something greater had begun. For a long moment, the sun hung suspended above the base like an old sentry, casting long shadows behind the line of those who now stood gathered at the perimeter. Emmett's hands rested gently atop the handle of his weathered case, the old metal corners dulled by time and the touch of hundreds of mornings like this one, quiet, unassuming, overlooked. But this morning was no longer quiet, and it was no longer his alone. He had not moved much since the general had walked out to him. His posture remained upright but modest, like a man raised to never draw attention unless it was absolutely necessary. But now that the rows of observers had assembled behind him, something in his shoulders relaxed. Not entirely, just enough, as though a weight he didn't speak about had shifted slightly to one side. A young woman stepped forward from the crowd. Her shoes were plain, her dress modest, her presence respectful. In her hands she held a cold bottle of water, the condensation tracing soft lines down her knuckles. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Emmett looked at her, just briefly, and then gave the smallest nod, one that said more than 1,000 thanks. She placed the bottle at his feet, gently, like it was something sacred. Behind her, others began to follow, not in a rush, not with noise or urgency, just with the steady rhythm of realization. A boy in a scout uniform, eyes wide and solemn, stepped forward and placed a single folded napkin on the case, a gesture he had likely seen done to a flag. An older man removed his Veterans of Foreign Wars cap and held it to his chest in silence. No one told them what to do. This was not that kind of gathering. Emmett's eyes found General Mendez again. No words passed between them, but something did. Recognition. The kind that only lives between those who have survived what others cannot imagine. The kind forged not by words, but by the sound of a radio crackling in the dark, the weight of another man slung over your shoulder, the silence of coming home when others did not. The general took a slow breath, then stepped beside Emmett, not in front of him, not behind, beside. It was the placement of equals, not in rank, but in sacrifice. And in that stillness, a moment unfolded between them that would not be printed in any program, not logged in any press release. It was the kind of moment that rewrote the meaning of the day. A mother emerged from the group with her young son in hand. She knelt quietly and placed a small bouquet of faded yellow carnations at the base of the fence post near Emmett's stool. The boy watched him carefully, then straightened his posture the way a child tries to mimic the men he wants to become. Emmett gave him a slow blink, not quite a smile, but close, and the boy beamed. From somewhere near the back of the assembled crowd, a quiet song began. Someone had pressed play on their phone. No grand speaker system, no orchestra. Just a simple recording of taps. The notes drifted into the space between shoulders and silence, and the entire line seemed to breathe in unison. No one moved, no one fidgeted. The music filled the space like fog on a battlefield, soft, reverent, final. One by one, the civilians who had arrived for the ceremony removed their badges, lanyards, and name tags. Some dropped them in a pile beside the original tent. Others tucked them into their pockets and walked forward. Rank no longer mattered. Roles had been dissolved. The only position now was either beside Emmett or behind him. Back inside the base fence, the original podium sat empty. Flags flapped overhead, ignored. A half-finished speech rested on the lectern, its words unspoken and irrelevant now. The MC flipped through note cards and slowly lowered them, unsure what to do with hands that were meant to guide applause, but now only clenched against awkward stillness. Yet outside, at the very place where Emmett had been stopped, denied and displaced, the real ceremony had rooted itself like an oak, steady, unmovable, and honest. And in the center of it all stood a man who said nothing, because nothing needed to be said. The story was in the way people leaned toward him instead of away, in how silence had become a language shared, in the way even the breeze now moved softer, as if it too had paused in acknowledgement. And then, without request or ceremony, Emmett unlatched the old case. The hinge gave a soft groan, not of protest, but of memory. Inside, resting on the blue velvet interior, lay a medal whose ribbons were still vibrant despite the age of the fabric. He did not lift it. He simply let it sit open, exposed to the morning sun, and allowed the crowd to see it for what it was. Not an ornament, but an oath kept. General Mendez turned to face the crowd, and though no words yet escaped his lips, the room, if it could be called that, braced itself. The pause was intentional, the moment alive. General Mendez turned slowly to face the gathering, not with the bearing of a man who commanded attention, but with the solemn grace of one who understood the moment was no longer his to lead. His decorations glinted under the late morning sun, but he made no gesture to adjust them. His hands remained at his sides, open, unguarded. His voice, when it finally came, was calm and resolute, as though it had been waiting decades to emerge. "This man," he said, nodding toward Emmett without touching him, "is the reason I wear this uniform, the reason I ever became a soldier, and the reason my father came home." A hush spread through the crowd, so complete that even the wind seemed to pause. Somewhere in the distance, a flag snapped crisply once, then stilled. The younger officers lowered their eyes. The veterans among them straightened their backs. Mendez crouched beside the open case at Emmett's feet and gently lifted the medal. His gloved fingers brushed it with the kind of care one might use to cradle a relic from a cathedral or an heirloom passed between generations, not because of its material worth, but because of the weight it carried. He held it aloft, just enough for those behind him to see. "He came today not for a ceremony," Mendez continued, his voice quieter now, reverberating only in the hearts around him, "but to return this." He turned the medal in his palm so the ribbons caught the light. "A silver star, awarded posthumously to Private Second Class David Hollins, United States Army, killed in action March 1973 during a supply retrieval mission northeast of Khe Sanh." A woman in the crowd gasped softly, not in disbelief, but in memory. The name had meaning to her. Somewhere among the rows of solemn faces, someone began to weep quietly. Emmett did not speak. He kept his gaze low, respectful, but his eyes, worn, rimmed with age, yet still burning with something sharp, never left the medal. "I was just a boy then," said Mendez. "My father served with Private Hollins. He rarely spoke about the war, but when he did, there was one name he always returned to." His voice cracked gently, not from performance, but from the ache of unfinished grief. He said a sergeant named Emmett Klein dragged 3 wounded men through 2 miles of mud and mortar fire. Said he refused evac until the last man was loaded. Said he stayed behind to carry the body of the youngest. Said the boy was 19. Mendez turned again to Emmett, the truth forming like mist on his breath. That 19-year-old was my father's best friend, and Emmett Klein made sure his body came home. There was a stillness now that reached into the bones. Emmett's name had been whispered at first, then repeated like a sacred truth, passed from breath to breath, until even those who had once dismissed him now stood humbled by the weight of his silence. "He came today," the general said, holding up the letter Emmett had folded and carried in his jacket pocket, "because he believed he was invited. He believed this base, this place he once bled for, would welcome him back, so he could return this medal to Private Hollins' daughter." Mendez reached into his own coat and retrieved a worn photograph. A young woman, standing next to a bronze marker, tears in her eyes, a small folded flag in her arms. She couldn't make it today, but she asked that if the man who saved her father ever surfaced again, this ceremony would be held in his name. Mendez's gaze swept the crowd slowly, but somehow, we told him he wasn't on the list. The shame in those words hung heavy. No one dared to fill the silence that followed. Even the birds overhead had stilled, as though the entire earth paused to listen. Emmett, moved by a force quieter than applause, took one slow step forward. His hand trembled slightly as it rose, not to accept anything, but to gesture gently toward the memorial plaque, the one that still sat unmounted, waiting to be claimed. "I don't need a place on any list," he said, his voice like dry cedar, old, warm, deeply rooted. "I just needed to make sure that he wasn't forgotten." The words fell into the crowd like a prayer. A few people wept openly now. Others covered their faces, not to hide but to honor. A young officer broke the line, walking forward to kneel beside the open case. He removed a small patch from his sleeve, the insignia of his current unit, and placed it reverently beside the medal. No one asked him to do it. He simply understood. Around the perimeter, those who had once clutched schedules or speaking notes now held only silence. The program was gone. The schedule had dissolved. But what had risen in its place was far more permanent. The living story of a forgotten hero returned. For a few breaths, nothing moved. Even the general's hand lingered mid-air before setting the medal gently back into the worn case at Emmett's feet. There was no fanfare, no applause, only a solemn nod from one man to another, witnessed now by those who had first passed by without seeing. The transformation had not come with a speech or a trumpet. It had come quietly, through stillness, through recognition, through silence reclaimed as reverence. At the far edge of the lot, beyond the ribbon-draped platform and the carefully arranged rows of empty folding chairs, the lead event coordinator held a tablet in one hand and a radio in the other. He had been managing the timeline with precision all morning, down to the minute, down to the movement of the speakers. But now, his voice faltered into the receiver. "The podium's empty," he said. "Sir, the crowd's moved to the fence line. There's no one left in the seating area." Inside the media tent, the sound crew turned down the microphone feed. The amplifiers buzzed quietly to themselves, idle. A small group of photographers, unsure whether they were still permitted to shoot, lowered their lenses. None of them aimed at Emmett. They just watched, a few with their hats removed, a few more blinking hard behind their viewfinders. And then someone did what no one had thought to do earlier. A staff member, one of the younger aides who had originally crossed Emmett's name off the list, stepped away from the refreshments tent and crossed toward the old presentation table near the front of the platform. Upon it rested a small black velvet cloth, and beneath it, the plaque they had planned to unveil later in the ceremony. It had been designed to sit on the northern wall of the repurposed headquarters building, where a hallway of past commanders now hung. This plaque was to be the capstone to the morning, a photo opportunity at best. But now she carried it, not with show, but with care. Each step toward Emmett felt like part of a pilgrimage. The crowd gave way, silently, as if moved by something unspoken. A reverence born not of hierarchy or protocol, but of witnessing the arc of injustice slowly bending toward dignity. She reached Emmett and offered him the plaque without a word. Her hands trembled slightly as she held it out. The bronze was warm from the sun, the engraving freshly etched. Dedicated to those who trained, fought, and returned quietly, Sergeant First Class Emmett Klein, United States Army, 1961-1985. He didn't reach for it. Instead, he looked at her, not to weigh or judge, but to acknowledge. Slowly, he turned his body toward the empty field beyond the gate, where formations once drilled before dawn, where echoes of boots on gravel had long since faded. He extended his arm and pointed softly. "Right there," he said. His voice was steady. "That's where I want it. That's where they used to fall in." The young woman nodded, eyes glassy. She turned and walked to the post nearest the path, planted the plaque's base between two tufts of overgrown grass, and pressed it firmly into the earth. A second staffer quietly followed with a small American flag, one of the many that had lined the main tent. He planted it beside the plaque, then stepped back. From the edge of the gathering, an older man began humming, a melody older than the war, older than the base itself. Another joined him, then more. It wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't in the program. But soon, voices rose into the late morning sun with quiet strength. Mine eyes have seen the glory. The battle hymn of the Republic had never sounded so soft, nor so powerful. General Mendez stepped back beside Emmett, not behind him, not above him, beside him. His gaze never left the small plaque, even as the hymn faded and the wind picked up. Someone brought forward a folding chair, the same one Emmett had carried himself earlier that morning, and placed it in the shade beside the mounted plaque. This time, Emmett did not resist. He sat down slowly, exhaling through his nose, as if letting go of something that had weighed down decades. "Permission to sit with you, Sergeant?" the general asked. Emmett gave a faint smile. "Permission granted, General." They sat side by side, their uniforms decades apart in design but identical in meaning. The crowd, once seated before a ribbon-cutting stage, now formed a respectful ring around the two men. Phones were lowered, voices quieted. The silence became sacred. In the distance, the sound of metal striking stone echoed softly. A maintenance worker, moved by the moment, had begun to polish the memorial wall at the gate. No one told him to. He simply did. And somewhere beyond that, in a modest parking lot not meant for VIPs, a woman in a grey sedan waited with the window down. She clutched a letter in her lap, one Emmett had mailed weeks ago. She was Private Hollin's daughter. Her eyes filled as she watched, knowing somehow she had arrived at the exact right moment. She didn't step forward. She didn't need to. For now, this was where legacy lived. Not in stone or ceremony, but in the quiet rearrangement of hearts. A week passed quietly. No official announcement, no press release. But word traveled, as it always does in places where honor matters. It moved not through headlines or broadcasts, but through hushed retellings in barbershops, through whispers over checkout counters, and in the folded letters left atop mantels in homes where uniforms still hang in closets. At 6:45 a.m., the gate to the old base opened again, this time on purpose. There were no contractors posted at the entrance, no VIP parking lines, just a clean, swept path and a sign newly mounted on the chain-link fence, its white letters simple and unadorned. "Open Gate Fridays, for those who served." Beneath it, a second plaque had been affixed in smaller print. "Welcome home, Sergeant." The first vehicle to arrive was a dusty, sun-faded Buick. It moved slowly down the gravel path, pausing only once as the new security officer stepped forward, not to stop the car, but to raise his hand in a crisp, wordless salute. From inside the car, Emmett Klein returned the gesture with equal precision. He parked near the same flagpole where his day had begun a week before. There was no audience waiting, no crowd, just a few figures off in the distance, quiet shapes, lingering like early morning shadows. He got out carefully, gripping the doorframe for balance. His coat was the same, a fresh polish on his boots. He carried nothing this time. Not his medal case, not the program, not even the thermos. His hands were free, and so was his pace. The folding chair was already there, set beneath a small pop-up canopy. Not much, just enough to cast a dignified square of shade over the new memorial site. The plaque had been polished, the little flag beside it replaced with a fresh one. And beside the chair, resting on a folding card table, was something new, a guest book. Its leather cover bore a seal, not of any organization or company, just an inscription that read, "For those who waited outside." Emmett eased himself into the chair and sat for a while, facing the horizon line where the training fields once stretched in uniform lines. His breathing was slow, measured, matching the rhythm of the morning wind. The base was still, not dead, just at peace. Within the hour, others began to arrive. First came an older couple, the man walking with a cane, the woman carrying 2 paper cups of coffee. They didn't approach Emmett directly at first. They simply nodded as they passed, as if checking in with a familiar face before continuing toward the flagpole. Then came a young man in jeans and a faded flight jacket, no ribbons, no fanfare, who paused, removed his cap, and wrote something in the guest book before sitting cross-legged on the grass. By 8 o'clock, Nearly a dozen had come. No single voice dominated the space. There were quiet conversations, the rustle of newspaper pages, the distant hum of base maintenance carts still tending to the grounds. But over it all was a sense of pause, not interruption, but reflection. Just before 9, a yellow school bus pulled up slowly to the side lot. The side read, Midtown Community School, District 3. A teacher stepped out first, adjusting her satchel, followed by a quiet trail of students, middle schoolers, maybe 7th grade. Their faces were curious but subdued, as though prepped in advance that this was no ordinary field trip. They approached the memorial in a gentle cluster. The teacher knelt beside the plaque and gestured toward the inscription. One student leaned in to read it aloud, his voice barely above a whisper. Dedicated to those who trained, fought, and returned quietly. He paused, looking up at Emmett. Did you come back quiet? Emmett nodded once. Most of us did. The boy thought for a moment. Why didn't they put your name on the program? Emmett looked out toward the base, the morning sun now climbing above the east fence line. They forgot, he said simply, but remembering stronger when it's earned. The teacher smiled softly and motioned her class to gather around. She pointed to the flag, to the canopy, to the guest book. This is what we call tradition, she said. It starts when someone is willing to sit down and stay, even when they're told to leave. Before they returned to the bus, each student placed a single white carnation at the foot of the plaque. One by one. No cameras, no certificates. Just memory being shaped in silence. Emmett watched them leave with the calm of a man who had seen too many beginnings, too many goodbyes, and finally, a full circle. As the morning stretched on, the chair beside his was never empty. A rotation of quiet visitors, veterans and civilians alike, came and went. Each one brought something unseen. Some left tokens, a coin, a photo, a ribbon. Others simply sat for a few minutes and rose again, as if the act of being there had restored something intangible. And when noon arrived and the sun stood high, Emmett stood again. Not because he had to, not because he was prompted, but because his presence had done what the schedule never could. It had started something lasting. He turned once more to the plaque, touched the edge with 2 fingers, and whispered, "That'll do." He nodded to the guard, who now stood at attention each Friday like clockwork, and walked slowly back to his car, jacket brushing gently in the wind, step steady. No fanfare, no encore. Just the soft echo of a tradition being born. If stories like this resonate with your heart, like and subscribe for more untold moments of honor and kindness. Let us know where you are watching from, and if this moment brought back memories you carry with you. The best way to honor their memory is to keep listening. Click on the suggested video now, and we'll walk together through another untold chapter of courage and sacrifice.